What amuses me, I guess, is the Liberals are shocked to discover there's ethnic politics going on. Certainly what this candidate said was objectionable, but what's really objectionable is the actual practice that she was describing, which everybody in politics does, everybody in politics knows is what goes on, that if you have a riding with a heavy concentration of whichever ethnic group it may happen to be, you pick a candidate, if you possibly can, who's from that group, and that's a big part of the selling point. And indeed, there's people who would go beyond that and say not only is that practical politics, but it's admirable in policy terms, that people can only really be represented by people from their own racial or ethnic group. So for people to then turn around and pile on her, her main crime was saying out loud, which you're not supposed to say out loud. You're supposed to just do it and not say it. And if you do say it out loud, then everybody in the other parties, hyperventilates and pretends to be outraged, which I guess is also what you do in politics.
Chantal, I'll let you jump in because I can see you want in before I go to Jason.
No, but Andrew is right. In theory, your name speaks for itself, and it sends the message that you want to send. And it is true that if you can play these kind of politics, you do it when you select your candidate. And there are plenty of MPs who are issued from that perspective. That being said, to the premise that people vote for their own rather than vote for others has been proven wrong in a variety of ridings across this country, including ridings like Romeo Saganache, where an Indigenous MP has been representing a very Francophone riding for almost a decade now.
Recently, I have been labeled as a racist, and which really, really makes me hurt. And I feel like I am abused. This is not me at all. I am not a racist.
Former Liberal by-election candidate Karen Wang there, forced to defend herself in front of the cameras in Burnaby South. Her offense, a declaration on a Chinese social media platform that while she is of Chinese descent, her high-profile opponent in the race is of Indian descent. That would be, of course, the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. There is a significant outcry, and the Liberals cut the candidate loose the next day. Yesterday, they named a new candidate, longtime Burnaby MLA Richard T. Lee. Will that nomination help British Columbians and Canadians forget what many saw as an unexpected turn to the politics of racism and divisiveness? For your thoughts and their thoughts on the ever-changing by-election saga, we turn to the Sunday Scrum. Joining me today in Ottawa, freelance columnist Susan Riley. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, John.
Globe and Mail columnist John Ibbotson. Hi, John.
Hi, John.
And in Toronto, podcast host and freelance journalist Vicky Mochama. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning, John.
Okay, will anyone stand up and defend Karen Wang here? Let's see whether she deserved the outcry and the national attention for her words. Susan, why don't you start us off?
So I'm going to say that initially I was a bit sympathetic to her. I thought essentially what she was saying is just the modus operandi of every major political party and many candidates. I mean, going back to John F. Kennedy, who relied on the Irish vote, the Catholic vote, to help get him elected. I mean, the appeal to tribe, if you want, or to ethnicity is a constant part of politics, and it's in some ways normal and natural, but it can be sinister if you're trading off one group against another group, which is what it sounded like she was doing. I felt sympathy for her because I thought she was a bit of an innocent, a naive who'd stumbled into, big-time, tough shouldered politics. But as I learned more about her background, I have less sympathy, and I think the Liberals were wise to abandon her. Not so much because of the charges of racism, which I think are a bit overwrought, but because she seems to be somebody who just really wants to get into Parliament. She doesn't really care what party it is. She's apparently considered and rejected by Conservatives previously, and then she tried again unsuccessfully at the provincial level, and so on. So I'm not sure how kind of anchored she is in any political philosophy.
Now, before we hear from the rest of the panel, we might as well hear from Karen Wang once again, the scrum in which she defended herself or tried to explain about what she felt was some misinterpretation. Let's have a listen.
It's a culture and a language, habit or tradition. Because the Chinese people, whenever you see the news about candidate on news on Chinese media, and they normally point out, oh yeah, he has a Chinese background and she has a Korean background, things like that. And But Korean or Chinese background, those things, and it means it's a Chinese Canadian or Korean Canadian. It's not. It doesn't mean I'm a Chinese. I consider myself as Canadian first.
Okay, and just to that point, while she's speaking for herself there, Ms. Wang has said that she had rejected the Conservatives rather than them rejecting her. But nonetheless, John, do you want to pick us up on the candidate and the tactics?
Well, she is manifestly unqualified to be in Parliament, no matter what party we're talking about. Look, this is an old story. Different immigrant groups coming into Canada have often brought old world tensions with them. Different immigrant groups in Canada have often conflicted with each other. I used to cover the Ottawa Valley a long time ago, and there the stories were legendary about the Irish versus the Polish, the Irish versus the English, the Polish versus the English. Of course, it all gets resolved within a generation and nobody remembers anything about it. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that there may be tensions between Indo-Canadians and Chinese Canadians in some communities, just as there are tensions between India and China. But it is utterly unacceptable for any political candidate to try to stoke those tensions, which I think that the tweet of hers clearly was trying to do. The tweet was saying, look, there are more Chinese Canadians in our riding than there are Indo-Canadians. The other candidate is an Indo-Canadian. This is how we win it. No, that's not how you win it. And it's certainly not how a Liberal candidate or a Conservative candidate would ever try to win it. So no, she has no right to be in this race.
Vicky, your turn.
I think I want to talk about the specific claim that she's making, because I was curious about this one as well, which is that she's saying that in the Chinese media it's traditional to identify people by their birthplace or ethnicity just as a marker of identity. And so that was the claim she was making in that clip. But the Star Metro reporter, and Star Metro is the place that broke the story, they said that she's actually, their bureau chief is actually somebody who spent years in China and analyzing news and media reports, and she said that, that's categorically just not true or plausible in this case. She's like, first of all, this is happening in Canada, and so the candidate should be aware that that's not how we communicate things in Canada. But second of all, she just said that, based on the translation, that's not plausible. And so I think it's important to address that, which is that she's not fit to be in Parliament because her rationale for things like this is not plausible.
It certainly managed to take the media focus off of Jagmeet Singh in terms of if he were to lose, would he still carry on as leader, etc. He was asked whether he'd be surprised that race would end up as an issue in this race, and here's what he had to say.
To be honest with you, I did not expect race to be a concern. This is one of the most diverse communities in Canada, and one of the things that we're so happy to see is that people really celebrate the fact that when you grow up in a community like Burnaby and many communities across Canada, people are proud of the fact that they have friends from different communities. They get to enjoy the richness of the diversity of this land, of this community, and that's something that people are proud of.
Let's not forget Jagmeet Singh first really captured national attention by his plea for tolerance and unity. Was this kerfuffle with the candidate a gift to Jagmeet Singh, Susan?
Well, I think he handled it with grace and humility, and he actually accepted Karen Wang's apology when she said she hadn't meant to slight him directly, whether sincere or not. He did accept it. I contrast that to the overwrought reaction from some Conservatives who are looking for any opportunity to hammer the Liberals and jumped on this. I think it's a real stretch to blame the Liberals for this candidate's actions.
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, if this was a Conservative candidate who had said these sorts of things, there would be a whole lot of people who would be jumping on the Conservatives saying, look, it just feeds to the racist sentiment that's a part of the Conservative base. So what's good for the Tories is good for the Liberals, and they should wear it just as much as the Conservatives did.
No, but just briefly, John, it depends on how, I mean, there's rogue candidates and there's bad candidates for all parties, and the judgment is how the political party reacts. And the Liberals reacted very quickly in distancing themselves from this candidate.
I think it's also worth, in some ways, blaming the Liberals because it sounds like this particular post wasn't appropriately vetted. It wasn't, it's not particularly even repeating particular party lines. So I think for a fairly high stakes by-election that the Liberals were the ones who stalled on calling, it doesn't sound like they were particularly prepared. So if they fail to do the advance work, this is kind of the outcome that they're going to get. And so I think they bear some blame for that, which is either not vetting the candidate or making sure that this particular campaign was staffed up to the level that it should be. That's a failing that the Liberals should have to swallow. I think we should also push back against the idea that racism is a gift to the candidate of color. I don't think that's fair to Jagmeet, and I don't think that's an appropriate way to analyze the situation.
And by the way, can we just use this opportunity to shoot down one of the most ludicrous conspiracy theories I have ever heard in my years in politics? There were some columnists in Ottawa, and discretion permits me from naming them.
Oh, it's John Ivison of the National Post.
John.
who said that this was all part of a great Liberal conspiracy, that they want Jagmeet Singh to win the riding because they think he's a weak leader, and therefore they deliberately torpedoed their own campaign by putting a ridiculous candidate in hopes that this would get Jagmeet Singh into the House and it would strengthen the Liberal position. Obviously, it was crazy off the top, and of course the fact that there is now a strong Liberal candidate to replace Ms. Wang makes it even more so.
Well, let's talk about that strong candidate, because they named him, and his name is Mr. Lee, and he spent 16 years in the BC legislature representing Burnaby. Now, he was asked about Wang's controversial post, and let's listen to his response.
Liberal Party of Canada, we actually promote participation of people in different backgrounds, all backgrounds, in the democratic process. Karen's comment is not aligned with the values of the party.
Okay, Vicky, you want to start us off on that, whether his choice will repair the damage and potentially face us with a real race in Burnaby South?
I mean, I think that remains to be seen, which is the Liberals are the ones who sought this particular fight, and whether or not they'll be able to communicate their party values or priorities in Burnaby, where their pro-pipeline politics might not necessarily be the most popular thing. That's kind of the real challenge. I think there are also just some base economic issues that aren't being addressed by this particular controversy. For example, Jagmeet Singh was standing in front of a senior center, and there's questions about housing affordability and senior care that are pertinent to Burnaby, BC, but are also massive nationally. And I don't know that we've seen a thorough policy reading about how that matters to Burnaby and to the nation out of this.
Okay, Susan, what's your assessment of the race as it stands now?
Well, I think it's hasty to write off Jagmeet Singh, which I have done in the past, by the way, and perhaps I was wrong. I think once he does win, I expect him to win and get into the House. I think the Liberals maybe shouldn't be quite so sanguine about how well he's going to do, because there are a lot of weak spots in their appeal to left-leaning voters that he could exploit. We'll see if he does.
Final word to you, John, on the race as it stands.
Well, first of all, Mr. Singh has to win the riding, absolutely. And then if he wins that riding, and the Liberals have wounded themselves, obviously, over all of this, then we will watch him in the House. I'm with Susan. I think we are too quick to dismiss Jagmeet Singh. We'll see how he performs in the House. The core polling numbers for the NDP are not that bad. They're sort of in the mid-teens. It doesn't take that much to get them up 3 or 4 more points. And then they are where they were under most good NDP elections, except for the great one of 2011. So let's just watch rather than judging Mr. Singh.